What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors finally reaches his breaking point with a late-night host who pushes too far? The answer involves raised voices, uncomfortable silences, and security being called to escort someone off set. This is the story of how Harrison Ford's appearance on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert turned into one of the most explosive moments in late-night television history. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think about celebrities standing up to hosts who cross the line. Now, let's get into what really happened that night. Harrison Ford walked onto The Late Show set that evening with his usual reserved demeanor, settling into the guest chair with the kind of quiet confidence that had made him a legend. The audience welcomed him with thunderous applause, clearly excited to see Han Solo himself in person. Colbert, wearing his trademark grin, seemed ready to deliver his usual brand of pointed humor. "Harrison Ford, ladies and gentlemen," Colbert announced, his voice carrying that familiar mock enthusiasm. "The man who made smuggling look cool and archaeology look dangerous. Welcome to the show, Harrison." Ford nodded politely, his hands folded in his lap. "Thanks for having me, Stephen." "So, Harrison, I have to ask." Colbert began leaning forward with that predatory smile that regular viewers knew all too well. "You've been in this business for what, 50 years now? When are you going to start acting like you actually want to be here?" The comment drew some nervous laughter from the audience, but Ford's expression remained unchanged. "I'm here, aren't I? Well, technically, yes, but your reputation for, shall we say, enthusiasm during interviews is legendary. I mean, you've basically made a career out of looking like you'd rather be anywhere else." Ford shifted slightly in his chair, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "I show up. I do my job. I promote the projects I'm contractually obligated to promote. What more do you want?" Cola's grin widened. "Oh, I don't know. Maybe some personality, some spark. You know, the thing that makes television actually worth watching." The audience was quieter now, sensing the tension building. Ford's eyes narrowed slightly, but he maintained his composure. "I'm not here to dance for you, Stephen. I'm here because I have a movie coming out. I'm here." Right. The movie," Colbert said, waving his hand dismissively. "But see, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You're sitting here like you're doing us some massive favor by gracing us with your presence. Do you realize how many actors would kill to be in that chair?" Ford's voice remained steady, but there was an edge creeping in. "And do you realize how many hosts would kill to have my track record?" "Ooh, there's a little fire," Colbert said, clearly enjoying himself. "But let's talk about that track record, shall we? Because I've got to ask. At what point did you decide that giving the absolute minimum effort was your brand?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Ford stared at Colbert for a long moment, his weathered face completely unreadable. "I give the effort the material deserves." "Ah, so it's everyone else's fault." Cola shot back. "The directors, the writers, the other actors, they are all just not good enough for the great Harrison Ford to actually try." Something flickered in Ford's eyes. "That's not what I said, but it's what you meant, isn't it? I mean, let's be honest here, Harrison. You've been phoning it in for years. Half the time you look like you're reading cue cards, and the other half you look like you're counting down the minutes until you can leave." The audience was completely silent now, the uncomfortable energy palpable. Ford's hands tightened slightly on the armrests of his chair. "You know what, Stephen? You're right. I am counting down the minutes because I'd rather be anywhere else than sitting here listening to some failed comedian take cheap shots at my work." Colbert's smile faltered for just a moment before returning full force. "Failed comedian? That's rich coming from someone whose idea of range is switching between grumpy and slightly less grumpy. At least I don't hide behind a desk making jokes about people who actually create things," Ford replied, his voice still controlled, but with an unmistakable hardness. "What have you ever created besides sarcasm and smugness?" The host's eyes flashed with something dangerous. "I've created a show that millions of people watch every night. I've created a career that doesn't depend on nostalgia for movies I made 40 years ago." Ford leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "And I've created characters that people will remember long after your show is canceled and forgotten." "Characters?" Cola laughed, but it was a harsh sound. "You mean the same three expressions you've been recycling for decades? The confused look, the angry look, and the slightly less angry look. You know what your problem is, Stephen?" Ford said, his composure finally beginning to crack. "You think being cruel is the same thing as being clever. You think tearing people down makes you seem bigger. And you think being a legend gives you the right to be a miserable human being? Colbert fired back. News flash, Harrison. Talent doesn't excuse treating everyone around you like they are beneath you. The accusation seemed to hit something deep in Ford. His eyes hardened and for the first time his voice rose slightly. I treat people the way they deserve to be treated. If you don't like my attitude, maybe you should look at why you're getting it. Oh, so now it's my fault that you're sitting here acting like this interview is some kind of punishment. Colbert's voice was rising too, his professional facade slipping. You agreed to come on this show, Harrison. Nobody forced you. I agreed to promote a movie, not to be your verbal punching bag, Ford shot back. But clearly, you've confused entertainment with humiliation. The tension in the studio was electric. Camera operators were glancing nervously at each other, and the audience sat in stunned silence. This was spiraling far beyond normal late-night banter into something much more personal and ugly. Colbert seemed to realize he was losing control of the situation, but instead of backing down, he doubled down. You know what, Harrison? You're absolutely right. This is humiliating. It's humiliating to watch someone who used to be great phone in another performance. It's humiliating to see a legend reduced to this bitter, angry shell of what he used to be. Ford's face went completely still, his eyes locked on Colbert's. When he spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. You have no idea what you're talking about, don't I? Colbert pressed, sensing he'd hit a nerve. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've spent the last 20 years coasting on past glory while resenting everyone who reminds you that your best days are behind you. The words hit forward like a physical blow. His hands gripped the armrest of his chair so tightly his knuckles went white. You want to see angry Stephen? You want to see what happens when I stop being professional? Is that a threat? Colbert asked, his voice dripping with mock concern. Are you threatening me on my own show? I'm warning you, Ford said, his voice carrying a weight that made several crew members take a step back. You're about to cross a line you can't uncross. But Colbert, either oblivious to the danger or simply too committed to his attack to stop, pressed forward with a smile that had become truly vicious. What line would that be, Harrison? The line between honest criticism and your fragile ego. The studio had gone dead silent. Ford's warning hung in the air like a loaded gun, but Colbert seemed determined to pull the trigger. His smile had transformed into something cruel and calculating, and he leaned back in his chair with the confidence of someone who thought he held all the cards. Fragile ego, Colbert repeated, savoring the words. You know what, Harrison? I think that's exactly what this is. I think underneath all that gruff, tough guy exterior, you're just a scared old man who can't handle the fact that the world has moved on without him. Ford's breathing had become deeper, more controlled, like a man trying to contain something explosive. Stephen, I'm going to give you one more chance to walk this back. Walk what back? Cola's voice was filled with fake innocence. The truth. Should I walk back pointing out that you've become a parody of yourself? That every performance you give now is just Harrison Ford playing a character. You don't know anything about my performances, Ford said, his voice low and dangerous. You don't know anything about the work that goes into them. Oh, but I do, Colbert countered, clearly enjoying himself. I know that you've been giving the same performance for 20 years. I know that directors have to beg you to show up on time. I know that you've become everything that's wrong with Hollywood, an entitled star who thinks the world owes him something. The accusation seemed to physically hit Ford. His face flushed red and for the first time his voice cracked slightly. You have no right to talk about things you don't understand, don't I? Colbert pressed, sensing blood in the water. Because I understand that you're sitting here on my show acting like you're too good for this, too good for the audience, too good for the very people who made you famous in the first place. Ford's hands were shaking now, barely contained rage radiating from every inch of his body. The audience deserves better than this. They deserve better than watching you tear people down for sport. The audience deserves honesty. Colbert shot back. And the honest truth is that Ura has been who can't accept that his time is over. The honest truth is that you're angry at the world because you're not the star you used to be. Stop, Ford said, his voice breaking slightly. Just stop. But Colbert was relentless. You know what the really sad part is, Harrison? You used to be great. You used to be someone worth watching. But now you're just this bitter, angry man who shows up to collect a paycheck and complain about having to do it. Ford stood up suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor with a harsh sound that made everyone in the studio jump. That's enough. Sit down, Harrison, Colbert said, his voice taking on a commanding tone. We're not done here. Yes, We are, Ford replied, his voice steady again, but filled with a quiet fury. We're done, Stephen. We're done with your little game. We're done with your cheap shots. And we're done pretending this is entertainment. Colbert's smile widened. Oh, now this is entertaining. The great Harrison Ford, ladies and gentlemen, walking away because he can't handle a little criticism. Ford turned to face him fully, and the look in his eyes made several crew members take a step back. This isn't criticism, Stephen. This is cruelty. This is you using your platform to humiliate someone for your own entertainment. I'm using my platform to ask the questions that need to be asked, Colbert replied, his voice rising. I'm using my platform to call out someone who's been coasting on reputation for years. You're using your platform to bully people, Ford said, his voice cutting through the studio like a blade. You're using your platform to make yourself feel important by making others feel small. I'm doing my job, Colbert insisted, but there was a slight tremor in his voice now. I'm being a journalist. Ford laughed, but it was a harsh, bitter sound. A journalist? Is that what you think this is? You think ambushing guests and attacking their character is journalism? I think holding celebrities accountable is journalism, Colbert replied, trying to regain his composure. I think asking tough questions is journalism. Tough questions. Ford's voice rose for the first time. You haven't asked me a single question about my work, about the movie I'm here to promote, about anything substantive at all. You've just spent the last 10 minutes trying to destroy me for your own amusement. The audience was shifting uncomfortably in their seats. This had gone far beyond awkward into genuinely disturbing territory. Kohler seemed to realize he was losing the room, but instead of backing down, he decided to go for the kill. You know what, Harrison? You're right. I haven't asked you about your work. So, let me ask you this. When you were making the new movie, did you even try? Or did you just show up, say your lines, and collect your check like you've been doing for the last decade? The question hung in the air like a slap. Ford's face went completely white, then red again, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. How dare you? How dare I? What? Colbert asked, leaning forward with renewed aggression. How dare I ask you to be honest about your own career? How dare I point out that you've been sleepwalking through roles for years? How dare you question my professionalism? Ford said, his voice shaking with rage. How dare you sit there and pretend you know anything about what I do or how I do it? I know what I see on screen, Colbert replied coldly. And what I see is an actor who's given up. What I see is someone who's more interested in his paycheck than his craft. Ford took a step toward the desk, his whole body radiating fury. You want to see someone who's given up? Look in the mirror, Stephen. Look at what you've become. You used to be funny. You used to be clever. Now you're just mean. I'm honest, Kohler insisted. But his voice was less confident now. I'm willing to say what everyone else is thinking. No, Ford said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. You're a coward. You're a coward who hides behind his desk and his audience and his writers, taking shots at people who can't fight back. Can't fight back? Colbert laughed nervously. You're fighting back right now. Am I? Ford asked, moving closer to the desk. Because it seems to me like you're the one with the power here. You're the one with the platform, the one with the audience, the one who gets to edit this however you want. That's how television works, Harrison, Colbert said, his bravado starting to crack. That's how this business works. That's how cowards work, Ford replied. That's how people who can't create anything of value work. They tear down the people who can. Kohler's face was flushed now, his carefully constructed persona crumbling. You think you're so much better than me, don't you? You think because you were in a couple of big movies 40 years ago that makes you untouchable. I think I've earned the right to be treated with basic human decency, Ford said, his voice steady despite the rage burning in his eyes. I think I've earned the right to come on a show and not be ambushed by someone who's more interested in going viral than actually entertaining people. Going viral? Kohler's voice cracked. You think this is about going viral? Isn't it? Ford asked, gesturing toward the cameras. Isn't this exactly what you wanted? The great Harrison Ford losing his temper. The legendary actor finally cracking under pressure. This is your moment, Stephen. This is your viral clip. The accusation seemed to hit home. Kohler's face went pale, and for the first time, he looked genuinely uncomfortable. That's not what this is about. Kohler's face went pale. Then what is it about? Ford demanded, his voice rising again. What is this really about, Stephen? Why did you bring me here just to tear me apart? Colbert opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. The studio was completely silent except for the hum of cameras and equipment. Ford stood there breathing heavily, waiting for an answer that didn't come. Finally, Ford shook his head in disgust. You don't even know, do you? You don't even know why you're doing this. You're just doing it because you can, Harrison. I think maybe we should take a break, Colbert said weakly, finally seeming to realize how far things had gone. No, Ford said firmly. No breaks, no cuts, no duvers. You wanted this, Stephen. You wanted to see what happens when you push someone too far. Well, congratulations. You're about to find out. Ford's words hung in the air like a death sentence. Colbert sat frozen behind his desk. His usual confidence completely shattered. The studio audience was dead silent, sensing they were witnessing something that would never make it to air. But Ford wasn't finished. You know what your real problem is, Stephen? Ford continued, his voice filled with a cold fury that was somehow more terrifying than any shout. You're jealous. You're jealous that I've actually done something with my life, while you've spent yours making jokes about people who have. That's not true, Colbert stammered. But his voice lacked any conviction. Isn't it? Ford pressed, moving even closer to the desk. You sit here night after night, commenting on other people's work, other people's lives, other people's achievements. When was the last time you created something original? When was the last time you did anything besides tear other people down? Colbert's face was bright red now, sweat beating on his forehead. I create content every night. I create comedy. I create commentary. You create nothing, Ford said with devastating finality. You recycle other people's material and call it your own. You mock other people's achievements because you don't have any of your own worth mentioning. You don't know what you're talking about, Colbert said. But his voice was shaking now, don't I? Ford's voice was getting louder, more intense. I know exactly what I'm talking about. I know what it's like to create something that lasts, something that matters. I know what it's like to put everything you have into a role, to care about the work, to respect the craft. And I know what it's like to watch that work get dismissed by someone who's never created anything more meaningful than a punchline, Ford continued, his voice rising to a roar. I know what it's like to have my life's work reduced to a cheap joke by someone who wouldn't last 5 minutes actually doing what I do. Colbert tried to stand, but his legs seemed unsteady. Harrison, please, let's just calm down. Calm down. Ford's voice was incredulous. You spend 15 minutes trying to destroy my reputation, my career, my character, and now you want me to calm down. I was just doing my job, Colbert said weakly. Your job, Ford laughed bitterly. Your job is to entertain people, Stephen. Your job is to make them laugh, to make them feel good, to give them something to enjoy. Instead, you've turned this into a blood sport. You've turned this into a public execution. The cameras were still rolling, but several crew members were looking around nervously, clearly wondering if they should stop filming. A few producers were whispering urgently into their headsets. You think this is entertainment? Ford gestured wildly at the cameras. You think watching you humiliate someone is what people tune in? 4. People want honesty, Colbert said, trying to regain some composure. They want real conversations, not just promotional fluff. Real conversations. Ford's voice was filled with disgust. Is that what you call this? A real conversation? You haven't let me finish a sentence without attacking me. You haven't asked me a single genuine question about anything I actually care about. I asked you about your work, Colbert protested. No, you attacked my work. Ford corrected. You attacked my professionalism, my dedication, my entire career. You didn't ask about it. You just dismissed it. Ford turned to address the cameras directly, his voice cutting through the studio like a blade. You want to know about my work. You want to know about dedication. I've been doing this for 50 years. 50 years of getting up at 4 in the morning, of learning lines, of working with directors and writers and other actors to create something meaningful. I've been injured on sets. I've pushed through pain. I've given everything I have to roles that matter to me, Ford continued, his voice growing more passionate. And this man thinks he can dismiss all of that because he doesn't like my attitude in interviews. Colbert was shrinking back in his chair, clearly regretting every decision that had led to this moment. Harrison, I think there's been a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Ford whirled back to face him. The only misunderstanding here is that you thought you could attack me and I would just sit there and take it. I wasn't attacking you, Colbert said desperately. I was just trying to have a conversation by calling me a has-been. Ford's voice rose again. By saying I don't care about my work. By suggesting I'm just collecting paychecks. That's your idea of conversation? Those were just questions, Colbert said. But even he didn't sound convinced. Those were insults disguised as questions, Ford shot back. Those were deliberate attempts to humiliate me in front of millions of people. A producer appeared at the edge of the set, gesturing frantically. Security guards were moving closer, though they seemed unsure whether to intervene or not. The whole situation had spiraled completely out of control. You know what the worst part is? Ford continued, ignoring the chaos around him. You're supposed to be on my side. You're supposed to be helping me promote my work, supporting the industry that we're both part of. Instead, you've turned this into some kind of gladiator match. I'm sorry, Colbert said quietly, the words barely audible. Sorry. Ford's voice was incredulous. You're sorry. You think sorry fixes this? You think sorry undoes the damage you've tried to do? I didn't mean for it to go this far, Colbert said, his voice breaking slightly. Yes, you did, Ford said with certainty. This is exactly what you wanted. You wanted to see me lose control. You wanted to push me until I snapped. Well, congratulations, Stephen. You got your wish. Ford turned back to the cameras one final time. This is what passes for entertainment now. This is what we've become. A place where hosts attack their guests, where cruelty is mistaken for cleverness, where destroying someone's dignity is considered good television. Harrison, please, Colbert pleaded. But Ford was beyond listening. I've spent my entire career trying to give people something worthwhile, Ford said, his voice filled with a deep sadness. Now, I've tried to create characters that people could believe in, stories that mattered, and this is what it's come to. This is how I'm treated for that effort. The security guards were moving closer now, clearly receiving instructions through their earpieces. Ford noticed them approaching and shook his head in disgust. And now you're going to have me thrown out, Ford said, his voice filled with bitter amusement. The final humiliation. The guest gets escorted off the set because the host couldn't handle the conversation he started. That's not what this is, Colbert said weakly. That's exactly what this is, Ford replied. You started something you couldn't finish, and now you're going to have security clean up your mess. The lead security guard approached cautiously. Mr. Ford, we're going to need you to come with us. Ford looked at the guard, then back at Colbert, then at the cameras. You know what? Fine. I'll go, but not because you're making me. I'll go because I refuse to participate in this circus any longer. Harrison. Wait, Colbert said, standing up for the first time since the confrontation began. Ford turned back to him, his eyes filled with contempt. Wait for what, Stephen? Wait for you to humiliate me some more. Wait for you to find new ways to attack my character. I just wanted to say, Colbert began, but Ford cut him off. Save it, Ford said coldly. You've said enough. You've shown everyone exactly who you are tonight. I hope it was worth it. With that, Ford turned and walked toward the security guards, his head held high despite everything that had happened. The studio was completely silent, except for the sound of his footsteps and the hum of the cameras still recording every moment. As he reached the edge of the set, Ford turned back one last time. You know what the real tragedy is, Stephen? You actually used to be funny. You used to be someone worth watching. But somewhere along the way, you forgot that comedy is supposed to bring joy, not pain. And with those final words, Harrison Ford walked off the set, escorted by security, leaving behind a stunned audience, a shattered host, and footage that would change late-night television forever. The cameras kept rolling as Colbert sat alone at his desk, his face pale and his hands shaking. He looked out at the silent audience, opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. There was nothing left to say. What do you think about celebrities who finally stand up to hosts who go too far? Should there be limits to how far late-night comedy can push their guests? Or is everything fair game in the name of entertainment? Let me know in the comments below.